And that was the life Katie Sullivan was living when this story began. She was 27, renting a tiny room on the edge of Philadelphia, in one of those neighborhoods where brand new apartment blocks stood shoulder to shoulder with crumbling old brick buildings from another century, and the trolleys rattled by so loud at night she sometimes had to stuff cotton in her ears just to sleep. For 5 years, Katie had been writing a novel. It was called The Cranberry Diary. The book was about a family of educated old-school Northeasterners who had lived through war, hunger, loss, and somehow still held on to love. It was about a love strong enough to outlast death, about forgiveness, about the things people survive and the things they never really recover from. Katie had started it during her last year of college, when her senior thesis was already finished, but her soul wanted something bigger. She wrote at night after work, on weekends, on commuter trains and waiting rooms, on her lunch break if she had 10 minutes to herself. The novel grew the way a child grows. First the idea, then the voices, then the people inside it started breathing on their own, and the story took turns that surprised even her. She worked as a proofreader at a tiny print shop near the riverfront. The job was dull, repetitive, correcting other people's mistakes, cleaning up sentences someone else had written, but at least it kept her close to books. Katie loved the smell of printer's ink, the clatter of the presses, that strange sacred feeling when a fresh page rolled off the machine still warm, smelling like paper and dust and heat. She used to imagine that one day her own book would come through that press, that she'd hold something in her hands that belonged to her, not somebody else's words, her own, words she had suffered for, words she had fought over down to the last comma. But for a long time that was all it was, a dream. Katie sent her manuscript to 7 publishers. 7 times she printed out 300 pages. 7 times she stacked them neatly, sealed them into envelopes, and spent the last of her money mailing them out. And 7 times she got rejected. The same kind of rejection every time, too. Polite, professional, merciless. Unfortunately, your project does not align with our current publishing needs. We're unable to take on the financial risk. The market is difficult right now. Breaking in as a debut author is especially challenging. One publisher even sent notes from an in-house editor. The writing shows promise, but the manuscript still feels underdeveloped. The pacing drags in places. The prose can get heavy. We recommend substantial revision and resubmission. So Katie revised it. She rewrote chapters, cut whole sections, added new scenes, rearranged conversations, poured herself back into the thing until she thought there was nothing left to give. No one wrote back. By then she was close to giving up. The room she rented from an older landlady smelled like somebody else's life and too many cats. There wasn't much furniture, a narrow bed, a desk always buried under printouts, an old second-hand laptop she'd bought off Facebook Marketplace. The thing overheated, made a grinding noise every time it turned on, and froze when she pushed it too hard. But Katie loved that laptop. Her whole novel lived in there, from the first rough sentence to the final period. Money was always tight. She brought home about $1,800 a month. $650 went to rent. A few hundred disappeared into transit and groceries. Most of what was left she sent to her mom, who lived in a small town outside Scranton and needed blood pressure medication every month. Katie saved money on everything. She bought food at the cheapest grocery store she could find, wore the same jacket for 5 years, never went out for coffee, never bought new books. She checked them out from the library instead. But every Sunday, no matter what, she still went to the post office and mailed her manuscript to another publisher. She had a folder full of rejections. She kept every single one in a plastic sleeve, like evidence, like proof that the road behind her was real. "You've got no luck, sweetheart," her landlady, Miss Gina, would say, peeking into the room. "Maybe it's time to stop writing, get a real job, meet somebody, get married." "I can't," Katie would say. "This is mine." And she meant it. She really couldn't stop. Every morning when she woke up, the first thing on her mind wasn't work, wasn't money. It was the book. How this conversation in Chapter 3 should really sound. How to describe a sunset over the river so the reader could feel it on their skin. Her characters, Maria and Alex, had become real to her. She talked to them, argued with them, cried with them. They were her family, her purpose, her hope. Sometimes at night, when the trolley screeched outside and the neighbors upstairs started fighting again, Katie would sit there rereading what she'd written and feel it. This quiet certainty. It's good. Not perfect, but alive. There were paragraphs that made even her cry. And she thought, if it does that to me, Maybe it could do that to somebody else, too. She didn't know for sure, but she believed. That September was cold and wet, the kind that seeps straight through your jacket. Katie was walking home from work along the river with her collar pulled up and her hands shoved deep in her pockets. Wind off the water kept throwing mist in her face. She was thinking about what she needed to buy that night. Rice, bread, maybe apples if they weren't too expensive. Her mood was as gray as the sky. That morning another rejection had come in. The fifth one? Maybe the sixth. She honestly couldn't remember anymore, and the worst part was she hadn't even felt hurt. She'd just slipped the letter into the folder and gone to work. Well, Katie, she muttered to herself as she walked, maybe today's not your day. Maybe tomorrow will be. What she didn't know was that tomorrow had already arrived. That in less than an hour she was going to turn a corner, see an old woman bent nearly in half under the weight of her grocery bags, and make one simple choice that would change her life. Not her talent, not her persistence, not the 5 years she'd spent bleeding into that novel, just one human act of kindness. The kind that doesn't expect applause. The kind that asks for nothing back. The kind that exists as naturally as breathing, as a heartbeat. Katie cut through a side alley to save time getting home. And there, by the dumpsters, she saw her. A tiny old woman in a worn wool coat and a knitted hat, bent over, bracing herself against a bench while she tried to get a grip on 2 enormous grocery bags. They were so heavy she couldn't even lift them off the ground. Next to her was another sack stuffed with potatoes, half spilling out onto the pavement. "Miss!" the old woman said when she spotted Katie. Her voice shook. "Please, help me. My heart's acting up. I can't—" Katie didn't hesitate, not even for a second. She grabbed one bag, then the other, slung the sack of potatoes over her shoulder too. The bags were brutally heavy, at least 30 pounds each, maybe more. Her shoulders immediately started screaming, but she didn't complain. She just smiled at the old woman and said, "Where do you need to go?" "That building right there, third entrance. I thought I wasn't going to make it. Thank you, sweetheart." They walked slowly. The old woman was breathing hard, gripping the railing whenever they stopped, pausing every few steps like her body just couldn't keep up. Katie didn't rush her. She could feel the handles digging into her palms, her shoulders throbbing, but she kept it to herself. And all she could think about was her grandmother, the one she'd buried 2 years earlier, and how hard it must be to grow old alone. Then her mind drifted back to her novel, to Maria, the woman she was writing about, who was lonely too and stubbornly strong. "You're such a kind girl," the old woman said when they finally reached the building. Katie gave a tired little smile. "Honestly, people don't stop for each other much anymore. Everybody's running somewhere. I do it too. I'm always in a rush. I just wasn't today." They stepped into the elevator. Katie hit the button for the 5th floor. It was one of those ancient elevators that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years, with cracked mirrors, dim yellow light, and that stale smell old buildings seemed to collect and never let go. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Brooks. Katie shifted the bags in her hands and said, "I'm Katie, just Katie." When the elevator opened, they stepped into a quiet hallway. Evelyn's apartment was on the corner with a tall, heavy door and an old brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. The second the door swung open, Katie caught the scent of polished wood, old books, and something else. Something faded and timeless, like the air inside that apartment had been holding its breath for decades. Katie carried the groceries into the entryway, set them down on the floor, and started to say goodbye, but Evelyn reached out and caught her gently by the wrist. "Oh no, don't even think about leaving yet. You're having tea with me. I ordered pizza and there's no way I'm finishing it by myself. Thank you, sweetheart. You saved me." Katie almost said no. She should have gone home. Back to her laptop, back to the novel, back to the guilt of not writing enough. But something stopped her. Maybe it was Evelyn's eyes, tired but alive, with that flicker of mischief still in them. Maybe it was the smell of all those books. Or maybe Katie was more worn out than she wanted to admit, and some part of her needed a place to stop for a minute. "Okay," she said, "but just for a little while." She had no idea that little while was about to change the rest of her life. The apartment was huge, one of those grand old places you only find in historic buildings downtown. High ceilings, crown molding, hardwood floors that creaked under your feet but gleamed like someone still cared enough to polish them. In the living room there was a massive oak table surrounded by carved wooden chairs. Paintings covered the walls, old ones in thick ornate frames, landscapes and portraits of long-dead people dressed like they belonged to another century. But the real thing, the thing you noticed before anything else, was the books. They were everywhere. Bookcases, shelves, window sills, stacks on the floor, little towers of them beside the couch, beside the armchair, even along the hallway wall. Katie had never seen that many books in a private apartment in her life. Sit, sit, Evelyn fussed, guiding her toward an old sofa piled with soft cushions. I'll put the kettle on. I've got sweet rolls. Raspberry preserves, too, homemade. My sister brings me jars from Maine, and you'll have to forgive the mess. There wasn't any mess. There was warmth, life, a kind of old-fashioned comfort that felt almost unreal. Katie sat down and looked around. On the coffee table were fresh literary magazines, the kind nobody really subscribed to anymore, unless books were still the center of their life. When Evelyn called from the kitchen, Katie asked, "You actually read all of these?" "Of course I do," Evelyn said. "I've read my whole life. I can't live without it. Reading's like breathing. My granddaughter keeps telling me to switch to a tablet. I told her absolutely not. I like paper. I like the sound of pages. I like the smell of ink." Katie smiled. She understood that completely. A minute later, Evelyn came back carrying a teapot, cups, a plate of pastries, and the jar of raspberry preserves. She set everything down and lowered herself into the chair across from Katie and studied her over the rim of her cup. Her gaze was sharp. Too sharp. Not nosy exactly. More like professional. Like she was measuring something, weighing it, deciding what it was worth. "Tell me about yourself, Katie. What do you do?" "I'm a proofreader at a print shop," Katie said, "and I write at night." Evelyn's eyes lit up. "You write? What, a novel?" Katie hesitated. "Sort of. Nothing special. Just for me." "Would you show it to me?" Katie gave a nervous laugh. I don't know. It's rough. Really rough. I've already taken it to 7 publishers. Every single one passed. At some point you start thinking maybe that means something." 7 is nothing," Evelyn said, firm as a judge. "Real writers get rejected 50 times, 100 times, and the good ones still keep going. You're young. You have time. But the thing that matters is talent. If it's there, it doesn't stay hidden forever." Katie felt warmth spread through her chest, and it wasn't the tea. 7 publishers had looked at her work and said no. And now this stranger, this little old woman she'd met next to a trash enclosure, was looking at her like the answer might actually be yes. It was strange, and it felt wonderful. "So what about you?" Katie asked, mostly to shift the attention off herself. "What did you do?" Evelyn smiled into her tea. "Oh, me? I've spent my whole life in books, around books with books for books. I'm retired now, technically, but I still know people, and my eye hasn't gone soft. I've read thousands of manuscripts in my lifetime. Truly good ones? Very few. But when I see one, I know. Instinct." Katie nodded, even though she wasn't totally sure what that meant. She finished her tea, ate one of the sweet rolls, and started to gather herself to leave, but Evelyn wasn't ready to let her go. "Stay a little longer, Katie. It gets awfully quiet here by myself. My granddaughter's in Chicago, my son lives overseas, and all I've got is a cat, and you can't exactly have a real conversation with a cat." She laughed, and in that moment Katie stopped seeing her as just some fragile old woman she'd helped home with groceries. She saw someone quick and alive and funny, someone who'd seen everything, known everyone, and still hadn't lost her appetite for life. "Okay," Katie said, "tell me something." So Evelyn did. She told Katie about the publishing world she came up in, back when nervous editors and gatekeepers would slash whole paragraphs out of a manuscript because they were afraid of the wrong people getting offended. She talked about the risks they took pushing difficult writers, the ones nobody wanted to touch. She talked about how the whole business changed later, how suddenly there was freedom. And then the market came crashing in right behind it, and good books started drowning in a flood of cheap, empty ones. She said she may have retired, but she never really left the work. She still consulted, still read, still helped young writers when she saw a spark worth protecting. "There's always talent," she said. "There always is. The problem is finding it, then believing in it long enough for it to survive. Without that, it dies." Katie sat there barely breathing. And all at once she realized who she was sitting across from. Not just a lonely elderly woman in a beautiful old apartment. A person who knew books inside and out. A person who might actually be able to tell her the truth. Whether she should keep going, or whether it was time to let the dream go. Carefully, Katie said, If I brought you my novel and would you read it? Bring it, Evelyn said without a second's hesitation. I'd be glad to, but I'll warn you now, I don't lie. If it's bad, I'll say so. If it's good, I'll say that too. Deal? Deal. Katie left 2 hours later. By then it was dark outside. The streetlights were glowing, and the fine cold rain had turned to wet snow. She walked along the river without even feeling the cold. The conversation kept replaying in her head. Evelyn's voice. Evelyn's eyes. The way she'd looked at her. There was something unusual about that woman. Something Katie couldn't explain, but felt all the way down to her skin. When she got home, she pulled the manuscript out of her desk drawer. 300 pages, printed and covered in edits. She ran her hand over the front page, let out a long breath, and slipped it into her bag. Tomorrow, after work, she'd bring it to Evelyn Brooks. And then she'd wait for the verdict. Honestly. After 7 rejections, what could possibly be worse? The next evening at 6 o'clock sharp, Katie was standing in front of that familiar apartment door. The door opened right away, like she'd been expecting her. Evelyn Brooks took the stack of pages without even looking down at it and set it on the little table by the door. Thank you, Katie. I'll read it. Come back in a week. That week crawled by. Katie barely slept, barely ate. At work, she mixed up 2 proof sets, and her supervisor pulled her aside and gave her a warning. At home, she'd sit in front of her laptop for hours and get nothing done. Not one real sentence. Her mind kept drifting back to that older woman with the heavy grocery bags. What was she going to say? That the novel was hopeless? That maybe it could be fixed? Or... And Katie was almost afraid to even let herself think this. That it was actually good? On the 7th day, she couldn't take it anymore and showed up a day early. Evelyn opened the door, and Katie knew instantly something had changed. The older woman's eyes were red, like she'd been crying. But she was smiling too. Not that polite little smile people give you when they don't want to hurt your feelings. A real smile, bright, almost giddy. Come in, Evelyn said. Come in, sweetheart. We need to talk. Katie walked inside and sat down on the same couch as before. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt loud enough to fill the whole apartment. I read it, Evelyn began, lowering herself into the chair across from her. And for 2 days, I could not put it down. I read at night, I read in the morning, I even read in the bathroom. Sorry, Katie, too much information, but this... She shook her head. This is good. This is very good. I did not expect this. Katie went completely still. She was almost scared to breathe. Do you even understand what you wrote? Evelyn continued. This isn't just a novel. This thing is alive. It's real. It cuts deep. You're Maria. That character stays with people. Your writing is clean. No fluff, no fake drama. The plot is classic, but it never feels tired. Katie, this is talent. Real talent. Big talent. And Katie just broke. She started crying right there, no holding it back, no wiping at her face, no pretending she was fine. She cried from relief, from joy, from the sheer shock of hearing the truth from someone at last. Not the polite version, not the professional brush-off, not some empty compliment people hand you to be nice. The real truth. But then Evelyn lifted one finger. That's not all, she said. There's something you need to know. I'm not just a reader, and I'm not just some retired old lady. Katie looked up. My name is Evelyn Brooks, she said, and for 20 years I was the CEO of North Star Publishing. I'm retired now, technically, but I still have connections. And I know exactly what to do with this book. Katie just stared at her. North Star Publishing was huge, the kind of publishing house that put out major prize winners, national bestsellers, books everybody had heard of. And this tiny older woman she'd met by the trash bins outside the building had once run the whole thing. I'm going to call some old friends, Evelyn said. I'm going to make sure the right people read your manuscript. I'm not promising it'll be on shelves tomorrow, but I am promising this much. It will be seen. Katie couldn't even speak. Her head was ringing. And all at once she thought about the grocery bags she'd carried for her, the blisters on her palms, the exhaustion, the cold, and she thought, was none of that for nothing? Did one small act, just stopping to help someone, really lead me here? Like she could read her mind, Evelyn gave her a soft look and said, You know, Katie, I was thinking last night, if you walked past me with those bags, if you just kept going, I never would have known about your book, and you would have kept getting rejection after rejection. And maybe eventually you would have quit, and the world would have lost a good novel. She paused. All you had to do was stop. Help, not look away. That was it. You helped me. And now I get to help you. That's how goodness works. She held out a handkerchief. Katie took it, wiped her cheeks, and managed a shaky smile. Thank you for everything. For the tea, for the pastries, for telling me the truth. I don't even know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Evelyn told her. Tomorrow, bring me the manuscript on a flash drive. I'll send it to the editor-in-chief. But for now, we're having tea. I made cherry pie today. The whole next day, Katie moved through life like she was underwater. She couldn't focus at work. She swapped pages in 2 separate proof jobs, missed a typo in an important contract, and her supervisor, a strict woman with wire-rimmed glasses, called her into the office and chewed her out. Katie nodded, apologized, said all the right things, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Her novel had been read by a woman who'd spent her whole life around books, and that woman had loved it, not liked it, not thought it had potential, loved it, called it very good. That word stayed with Katie all the way home, through the evening, through the night. Very. It warmed her from the inside out. The next day she went back to Evelyn's place with a flash drive in her pocket, the manuscript already copied over. She'd brought the printed version too, just in case. Evelyn greeted her at the door, warm as always, but there was something almost ceremonial about her now. She wasn't wearing one of her house dresses this time. She had on a crisp blouse with a brooch pinned at the collar, a silver crane. Katie noticed it but didn't think much of it. Sit down, Katie, Evelyn said. This is a serious conversation. They sat at the oak table. There was already a teapot there, 2 cups, a plate of cookies, and then Katie saw something that made her blink. A bottle of champagne. Real French champagne with a gold label. Wait, are you celebrating? Katie asked. We are, Evelyn said. But first, I need to explain something. You already know who I was. What you don't know is who I still am, and how much weight my voice still carries in publishing. She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. I left the company 5 years ago. Officially, I retired. Unofficially, I still consult. I still read manuscripts. I still make recommendations. And I still have a vote. When I call an editor-in-chief and say, you need to take this one, people listen. Because in 20 years, I was never wrong. Katie swallowed hard. The champagne sitting there felt unreal, like a symbol of some life that belonged to other people, not her. I sent your manuscript last night, Evelyn went on, to North Star's editor-in-chief, Irene Walker. We worked together for 15 years. In a lot of ways, I taught her this business. She read your novel overnight. Katie, she didn't sleep. She got up at 6 in the morning, finished the last 200 pages, and called me. Katie slowly shook her head. Her heartbeat had climbed all the way into her throat. And do you know what she said? Katie couldn't answer. Evelyn smiled. She said, this is a bestseller. Word for word. Then she said, Evelyn, this is a bestseller. We're taking it. We're offering a contract. First print run, 10,000 copies. Silence. Katie could hear the wall clock ticking, the wind outside the window, a dog barking somewhere far off, and inside her, something gave way. A wall she'd been building for years. Brick by brick, fear, doubt, rejection, all of it cracked at once. 10,000? She whispered, her voice rough and thin. 10,000, Evelyn said, nodding. That's a big number for a debut novelist, a very big number. But they believe this book will sell. And so do I. Katie covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders were shaking, but she wasn't crying. Not exactly. She was laughing through the tears, through the spasms in her chest, through the tremble she couldn't control, laughing because she couldn't believe it, because it felt impossible, like one of those miracles people only talk about in books. Not something that happens to a regular girl from the edge of town, a girl who hauled other people's groceries and collected rejection letters like unpaid bills. Evelyn reached over and took her hand. This isn't random, she said quietly. This is how life works, not always, but more often than people think. You helped me when I needed it. You stopped. You didn't just walk by, and now I'm helping you. But I didn't do anything special, Katie whispered. I just helped you carry your bags. To you, maybe. To me, it was everything. If you hadn't been there, I might have collapsed right there by the dumpsters. My heart's not good, Katie. Who knows how that would have ended? But instead, I'm here, I'm fine. We're drinking champagne and talking about your book, so don't minimize what you did. It mattered. It mattered a lot." Then Evelyn popped the champagne. The cork flew out with a sharp crack and pale foam spilled over the neck of the bottle. She filled both glasses and raised hers. "To you, Katie, to your book, and to the fact that there's still kindness left in this world." "To kindness," Katie echoed, touching her glass to Evelyn's. They drank. The champagne was sweet, with just enough bite, and the bubbles tickled the roof of her mouth. Katie had never had expensive champagne in her life, and in that moment it didn't even feel like she was drinking wine. It felt like she was drinking success, hope, a future she'd barely let herself imagine. "What happens now?" she asked. Now the real work starts," Evelyn said. "Margaret will send over the contract. You'll sign it. Then there'll be edits, though honestly, probably not many. The manuscript is strong. After that, layout, cover design, the print run. In about 6 months, your book should be out in the world, and then we'll see what it can do." "And what if it flops?" Katie asked suddenly. The fear came back so fast it almost took her breath away. "What if nobody buys it?" "It won't flop," Evelyn said, firm as steel. "I've been in publishing for 30 years. I know what reaches people. Your book reaches people, believe me." And Katie did believe her, not just because Evelyn was experienced, not just because she knew the business, but because in Evelyn's eyes there was the same fire Katie felt in herself when she wrote. That stubborn little flame that says keep going, the kind that doesn't lie. They'd talked until almost midnight. Evelyn told her how to build a writing career, how to deal with critics, how to survive those first reviews, even the brutal ones. She told her not to get arrogant, not to get scared, not to quit. By the end of the night, she didn't feel like a mentor anymore. She felt like something rarer than that. A real friend, wise, gentle. The kind of person who shows up exactly once in a lifetime if you're lucky. When Katie was leaving, Evelyn hugged her and held on for a second longer than expected. "You know something?" she said softly. "I haven't felt this needed in a long time. Someone like you. You gave me my sense of purpose back. You're not the only one who got a second chance tonight. So did I. Moments like this are why I did this work my whole life." Katie stepped outside into the cold. The night was clear and full of stars. The air stung her cheeks. She walked along the Chicago River staring at the black water, at the bridge lights, at the old cathedral glowing in the distance, and tried to understand how any of this was real. 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. She couldn't have imagined a night like this. Couldn't have imagined standing there with a contract from North Star Press practically in her pocket, even if it was only a verbal offer so far. Couldn't have imagined that the novel she wrote in the dead of night, surrounded by other people's smells and other people's noise and all those endless rejections, would actually be seen, read, held in someone's hands. 10,000 people, maybe more. And then she thought about that older woman with the bags, the one she could have ignored, the one she could have walked right past. She could have said, "Sorry, I'm in a rush," could have kept going, and everything would have turned out differently. Katie had never believed in fate, never believed in signs, but that night for the first time she caught herself thinking, maybe there is something out there, something that nudges us, something that remembers when we choose kindness. She didn't know if that was true, but she knew this much. Her life had changed for good. When she got home to her tiny room, she sat down at her laptop and opened a blank document, not for the novel, for something new, for the first page of a different life. She smiled and started typing. About what? About that older woman with the heavy bags. About one small act of kindness that came back 100-fold. About a miracle that somehow found her. This one's a short story, she told herself, not a novel. Just something simple, something warm, so anyone who reads it understands. Don't walk past people. Stop. Help. What you give comes back. She wrote until 3 a.m, until her fingers ached. Then she finally lay down and fell asleep almost instantly. And she dreamed she was standing on a stage in a huge auditorium holding her book in both hands. In the front row sat Evelyn, small and silver-haired, wearing that crane brooch she loved, applauding, and then the whole room was applauding with her. Katie woke up the next morning feeling so happy it was almost physical. Clean, bright happiness, the kind you could drink at like cold spring water. It filled her up so completely she could hardly sit still. And somehow, she knew this was only the beginning. The most important part was still ahead. She signed the contract with North Star Press 2 weeks later. For those 2 weeks, she lived like she had a fever. Every day she expected the phone to ring and some polite voice to say, "We're so sorry, there's been a mistake. Your book isn't right for us after all." But that call never came. Instead, there were emails. Official ones. Businesslike. Attached PDFs, signatures, legal language she barely understood. First the editorial agreement, then the author contract, and then more paperwork after that. Katie signed everything they sent because she trusted Evelyn, and Evelyn kept telling her, "It's fine, sign it." The editor-in-chief, Margaret Hayes, turned out to be a woman in her 40s with a cropped haircut, sharp eyes, and a voice that clearly wasn't used to being argued with. She called Katie herself. That alone felt huge. Katie picked up, and a confident, slightly raspy voice came through the line. "Katie, Margaret Hayes from North Star Press. Congratulations! We're officially moving forward. Your novel is now in production. Your editor will be Natalie Archer. She'll be in touch. We'll start a cover development in about a month. Any questions?" "No," Katie breathed. That was all she could manage. "Excellent. Expect a call soon." And then she hung up. Katie just stood there with the phone in her hand, heart pounding so hard it hurt. In production. Those words sounded like music. She wanted to call her mom, but it was too late. She wanted to text Evelyn, but stopped herself. What if she was asleep? So instead, Katie sat down on the edge of her bed and cried for the third time that month. Only this time, it was pure happiness. And the next day, Natalie Archer called. She was the complete opposite of Margaret. Soft-spoken, delicate, warm in a way that made you instantly unclench. She introduced herself, told Katie she'd already read the manuscript cover to cover, and said she'd found only a few minor stylistic issues. "Mostly commas," she said. "You really love them, you just don't always put them in the right place." Katie laughed because that was true. She did love commas. The editing process took 2 months. Katie and Natalie worked remotely, sending drafts back and forth, jumping on Skype calls, arguing over word choices like they actually mattered, because suddenly they did. One time they spent almost 30 minutes debating whether to cut the word "suddenly" from a scene where Maria faints. Katie insisted it had to stay. It carried the shock of the moment. Natalie said, "It hits harder without it." In the end, they kept it. And Katie was happy. Really happy. Because for the first time her opinion wasn't being brushed aside. She didn't feel like a placeholder or some girl who got lucky. She felt like a real collaborator. While they were editing, Katie learned how much she'd never known. At a major publishing house, a book didn't belong to just one person. There was the editor, the copy editor, the designer, the cover artist, the marketing team. All of them touched it. All of them left something of themselves behind. And she watched her manuscript change right in front of her, getting cleaner, sharper, stronger, more like the book it had always been trying to become. She kept thanking Natalie, and every time Natalie waved it off. "It's my job," she'd say. "But your writing really is good. These are exactly the kinds of books I love." Then one day, they invited Katie into the office to talk about the cover. She was nervous from the second she woke up. She put on her nicest blouse, bought flowers for Irene Walker, and rode downtown with the bouquet in her lap like it was some kind of flag. And the whole subway ride, she kept thinking the same thing. This is it. This is where my real life starts. The publishing house was in an old building downtown, the kind with stone columns out front and polished floors inside. It smelled like paper, coffee, and something else she couldn't quite name. Success, maybe. They led her into a conference room where Irene was already waiting, along with Natalie and the cover artist, a young guy with glasses and a trimmed beard named Alex. 3 cover options were spread across the table. Katie actually gasped. They were beautiful. Not just pretty, professional, elegant, expensive looking. Real. One had cranes flying over water at dusk. One showed an old brick alleyway in Boston, full of shadows and winter light. The third was more abstract, all soft blue-gray brushstrokes that looked like waves rolling across a river. Katie stared at them, completely frozen. She loved all 3. "You choose," Irene said. "It's your book." Katie stayed quiet for a long time. Then she pointed to the one with the cranes. Cranes over the Charles. That was the title of the novel, after all. The cranes were hope, memory, the idea that maybe, somehow, you could still find your way home. It felt right. "Perfect," Irene said with a nod. "Alex, polish that one up." He nodded, gathered the mock-ups, and left. Katie stayed behind with the editors. They drank coffee and talked about the release plan, about getting the book into major chain stores, about maybe landing reviews in Publishers Weekly or The Atlantic if things broke their way. Katie listened in silence, barely breathing because she still couldn't quite believe any of it was happening to her. A year earlier, she'd been sitting alone in her room rereading rejection letters and wondering if she should just give up already. And now people were discussing her book seriously, like she was an actual writer. At the door, on her way out, Irene stopped her. "Katie," she said, "don't expect instant success. The book may not take off right away, but it's good. It'll find its readers. Just be patient." Katie nodded. She could be patient. She'd already waited 5 years for this moment. Waiting a little longer wasn't going to kill her. 4 months after signing the contract, she got an email. "Your book has been sent to print. First run, 10,000 copies. Publication date November 15th. Katie read the email 10 times, maybe more. Then she called her mom. "Mom, my book is coming out. November 15th. 10,000 copies. Mom, do you hear me?" Her mother started crying. Katie did too. They stayed on the phone for half an hour, remembering everything. The nights Katie stayed up writing. The times her mom kept believing in her when nobody else did. The way she never once told her to be practical or give it up or move on. "You're my girl," her mother said through tears. "I'm so proud of you." "It's not just because of me," Katie said. "Someone helped me. A lot." And she told her about Anna. Her mom was stunned, cried even harder, and said she was going to pray for that woman that night. And then November 15th finally came. Katie woke up early even though she'd barely slept at all. She spent the whole morning waiting for a call from the publisher. At 10 o'clock, Natalie called. "The books are in the warehouse," she said. "They'll hit stores tomorrow." "Congratulations!" Katie almost asked if she could have a copy for herself, but suddenly she felt shy. Silly, almost. So instead she got dressed and went downtown to a bookstore on Newbury Street, and there it was, on the new releases table. Cranes over the Charles. A blue cover with cranes sweeping across it. Her name printed in a large, elegant type. Katie picked it up with both hands, opened to the first page, read the first lines. They were hers. She had written them 3 years earlier on a rainy night when she couldn't sleep, and now they were here. Printed, bound, real, available to anyone. She bought 3 copies, one for herself, one for her mom, one for Anna. At the register, the cashier looked at her face, then at the book, and asked, "Wait, are you the author?" Katie nodded, too overwhelmed to answer out loud. "Congratulations," the woman said, smiling. "First book?" Katie nodded again. She walked out of the store, holding the bag against her chest like if she loosened her grip, the whole thing might disappear. Outside it was snowing. The first snow of the season, big soft flakes, almost like feathers. They landed in her hair, on her shoulders, on the glossy covers peeking out of the bag, but she didn't feel cold at all. She just kept walking down the street, looking at strangers passing by and thinking how none of them knew what had just happened. That she, Katie Sutton, former proofreader at a printing shop, had become a writer, a real one, a writer with a book on a shelf. She went straight to Anna's place. The old woman opened the door, saw the book, and burst into tears. They stood there hugging in the doorway like family, then sat in the kitchen drinking tea and eating sweet rolls while talking about how strange life was, and how sometimes it could still surprise you. "Thank you," Katie said quietly. "You gave me my life." Anna shook her head. "No," she said. "You gave it to yourself. I just helped." Then she smiled. "And I helped because you helped me first. Remember the grocery bags?" Katie laughed through her tears. "I remember. I'll never forget them." The first few weeks after the release were quiet. Too quiet. Katie waited for reviews, but none came. She checked bookstore websites over and over, staring at her novel in the catalog like that alone should mean something. A couple of ratings showed up, maybe 2 or 3, mostly from people she knew who'd bought the book just to support her. And little by little she started to panic. "Nothing's happening," she told Anna. "What if all of this was for nothing?" "Give it time," Anna said. "Success doesn't show up in a week. Sometimes it takes 3 months, sometimes 6, sometimes a year. Your book isn't trendy. It isn't flashy. It's for people who really read. And those readers, they take longer to find their way to a book." So Katie waited. She kept working at the print shop. The publishing deal hadn't made her rich. The advance was modest, enough to cover a couple months of living expenses, nothing more. She still wore the same old coat to work, still bought bread and cheap groceries from the discount store. But inside her, something had changed. But inside her, something had changed. She knew it now. She was a writer. Even if nobody bought the book, even if it disappeared without a trace, she was still a writer. Nobody could take that away from her. Then in December, the first miracle happened. A review went up on a popular book blog. A young woman who wrote under the name Reading in the Dark posted, "Cranes at Dawn is the best debut novel of the year." I cried. I laughed. There were pages I had to read 3 times. Katie Sutton is a name we're going to remember. And just like that, people started sharing it. Hundreds of reposts. The book began to move. Katie saw it first in the online sales numbers. 10 copies a day, then 20, then 50. A few days later, the publisher emailed her. "The warehouse stock is almost gone. We're preparing a second printing. Another 5,000 copies." Katie just stared at the screen. She honestly thought she had to be reading it wrong. In January, a reporter from the city paper reached out and asked for an interview. The journalist was young, polished, sharp, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged everywhere she walked into. She asked about writing, about inspiration, about what Katie wanted next. Katie talked about the novel, about Mary and Alex, about wartime hunger, about love, about how people keep living even when life has already taken almost everything from them. The reporter listened with this open, almost stunned expression, then finally said, "You know what's rare? Somebody who talks the way they write." "You do." The article ran as a full 2-page spread. Twice after that, strangers recognized Katie on the street. Twice. And to her surprise, it felt good. Ridiculous, unreal, a little embarrassing, but good. For the first time in her life, she felt almost famous. Then came more interviews, more reviews, more reprints. The print run climbed to 20,000, then 30. Cranes at Dawn landed on bestseller lists at several major bookstore chains. Letters started coming in from readers. Some were tender, some grateful, some so emotional she could barely finish them. One woman wrote, "Your Mary is me. Thank you for telling my story." Another said, "I haven't cried over a book in 20 years. I cried over yours." Katie would reread those messages at night, sitting alone in her apartment, and her eyes would fill before she even realized it, because suddenly it hit her. Her words were reaching people. They were changing people, comforting them, giving them hope. That was bigger than success. That was a calling. In March, she got a call from New York. They wanted her at a major book fair to present the novel. Katie panicked. She had never spoken in front of a big crowd in her life. But Anna told her, "Go! This is your moment. Don't be scared." So she went. In New York, she saw her book on the publisher's display for the first time, beautifully stacked, front and center, like it mattered. Readers came up to her, asked for autographs, asked questions, told her what the book meant to them. She smiled. She answered. She did her best. But inside, everything was shaking. After the event, a woman around 60 walked up to her, dressed all in black. "Are you Katie Sutton?" "Yes." The woman looked at her and said, "I lost my son in Iraq. Your book helped me survive that, thank you." And Katie just broke. They hugged right there in the middle of the convention floor, and Katie cried without even trying to hide it, because in that moment she understood something she hadn't fully understood before. Her novel wasn't just a story. For somebody, it was medicine. For one person, it was for loneliness. For another, grief. For someone else, pure despair. And she had made that. When she got back to Boston, she showed up at Anna's apartment with flowers and a bottle of champagne. "We did it," Katie said. "You did it," Anna corrected her. "I just opened the door." They sat in the kitchen drinking champagne and eating a cake Katie had bought from an expensive bakery, the kind of place she'd never once let herself walk into before. Anna looked at her with this quiet pride, almost like a grandmother. "You know," she said, "in 30 years I've seen a lot of first-time writers. Some take off, some fade fast." Katie smiled. "And which one am I?" Anna raised her glass. "You're going to soar. I can feel it." "Aren't you worried I'll get full of myself?" Anna laughed. "No, that's not who you are. You remember where you came from. You remember the bags." Katie laughed too. The bags had become their private symbol, their password. The little thing that reminded them both where all of this had started, with one small act of kindness. Anna, Katie asked, "Have you ever thought about writing a memoir?" "I have. I just never had the time. Maybe now that I have a famous friend, I finally will." "I'll help," Katie said. "I'll be your editor for free." They clinked glasses. That whole evening they talked about the future. Katie's next books. Anna's memoir. How rare it is to have a real friend in your life. Someone older, wiser, steady. Someone who shows up exactly when you need them. Later, Katie rode home on the subway. She pulled her book out of her bag. She always carried a copy with her now, like a good luck charm. Opened to the first page. Read the dedication. For my mother and for Anna. For believing in me. She had added that at the very last second, right before the manuscript went to print. Her mother had been deeply moved. Anna, too, though she'd tried not to show it. "You could have dedicated it to me for the grocery bags alone," Anna had joked. Katie smiled at the memory, closed the book, and slipped it back into her purse. The train raced through the dark. Lights flashed past the window, and she kept thinking how much one day can change. One meeting, one choice. If she hadn't helped that old woman that day, there would have been nothing. No book, no success, no happiness. But there was. By summer, Cranes at Dawn had become something people were talking about everywhere, critics noticed. A major literary paper ran a long review under the headline, "A Powerful New Voice in Fiction." The reviewer wrote that Katie Sutton wasn't reinventing the wheel. She was simply telling a story, but telling it so honestly and so beautifully that you forgot the rest of the world existed. Her language feels alive. Her characters feel real. This book is an event. Katie read that review 10 times. Then she called her mother and read it out loud over the phone. Her mother cried. Then she called Anna. "I told you," Anna said. "You're talented." In June, the book was nominated for a major debut fiction prize. Katie flew to New York for the ceremony. She bought an expensive dress for the first time in her life from a real department store, not some clearance rack or street market. High heels she could barely stand in. Makeup. Hair. The whole thing. Like one of those women on red carpets she'd only ever seen in magazines. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The ceremony was packed. Writers, critics, publishers, journalists. Katie felt completely out of place. But she kept smiling. Then they started announcing the finalists. Her heart dropped. A pause. And then the winner. Catherine Sutton for Cranes at Dawn. After that, everything blurred. She didn't remember walking up to the stage. Didn't remember what she said into the microphone. She only remembered the applause. And the little bronze crane in her hands. A crane. The symbol of the prize. The symbol of her book. After the ceremony, people crowded around her. Congratulations, photos, questions, more photos. Katie smiled, thanked them, answered what she could. But inside, only one thought kept pounding in her head. I have to call Mom. I have to call Anna. She stepped out into the lobby, pulled out her phone, and dialed her mother's number. Mom, she said, her voice shaking. I won. Her scream was so loud Katie had to pull the phone away from her ear. You're a genius, her mom kept saying. I always knew it. Always. Then Katie called Anna. Anna didn't scream. She just went quiet for a second and then said softly, Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. Come by tomorrow. We'll bake a pie. The next day, Katie showed up with flowers in one hand and the award in the other. Anna turned the bronze crane over in her hands, studying it from every angle, smiling like she couldn't quite believe it was real. I'm putting this on the mantle, she said. Right next to your book. That'll be my proudest little corner. It's because of you, Katie said. If it weren't for you, Anna cut in. Stop. We've already been over this. So they drank tea and ate warm apple cinnamon pie and talked about what came next. Katie had already started a new novel, a story about modern love, impossible choices, and the way happiness never seems to be waiting where you think it will be. She brought Anna the first chapters. Anna gave notes, argued with her, got excited, circled lines she loved. You have readers now, she told her. Thousands of them. You don't get to let them down. I know, Katie said, nodding. I'm writing for them, and for you. By August, Crane had sold 50,000 copies. The book was picked up for English and German editions. Foreign publishers started reaching out. Katie hired an agent, a young woman who handled international rights, and suddenly everything started moving so fast that some nights Katie would wake up in the dark and just lie there, terrified it had all been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. That fall, she left the print shop for good. The goodbye was warmer than she expected. Her co-workers gave her flowers and a box of chocolates. Her boss smiled and said, "We always knew you were talented. We just didn't know how talented." Katie hugged every one of them, promised she'd come visit, promised signed copies for all of them. Now she worked from home at a brand new laptop she'd bought with her royalties. Her room slowly filled with books, not just her own, but other writers' books too, stacked on shelves she kept adding to. On the wall hung her favorite photo, her and Anna standing in front of a bookcase, both smiling like they were in on the same secret. Katie looked at that picture every day, and every day she remembered where all of it had started. Sometimes she'd be walking through the city and see her book in a bookstore window. The feeling was still strange, pride mixed with disbelief. Was that really her name? Was that really her story? She'd stop, stare for a second, snap a photo for her mom, and then keep going, because now this was her job, her life. One day on the subway, she saw a young woman reading Crane. The girl was completely lost in it, curled over the book like the rest of the world had disappeared. Katie sat down beside her and glanced over. She was reading the goodbye scene between Maria and Alex. The girl was crying, actually crying, wiping tears off her face and still turning pages. Katie wanted to say something. I wrote that. Those words came from me. But she didn't. She just smiled to herself and got off at her stop. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath. "Thank you for reading." A year passed from the day Katie helped that old woman with her bags, and in that 1 year, her whole life turned inside out. She became a known author. She was invited onto TV shows, interviewed by newspapers, asked to speak at colleges about literature and writing. She made enough money to move her mom out of that small town and bring her to Chicago. The two of them rented a small but cozy apartment on the north side. Her mom didn't work anymore, Katie made sure of that. Now she baked pies and waited for her daughter to come home from readings and events. "You're my pride and joy," she told her almost every night. "I always believed in you." And Anna. Anna became something like a second mother. They saw each other almost every week. Katie brought her books, fruit, new magazines. They drank tea, argued about novels, picked apart plots, laughed over terrible endings. Anna read everything Katie wrote. Manuscripts, short stories, even rough drafts no one else was allowed to see. She was the strictest critic Katie had, and the most loving one, too. "Too many adjectives here," Anna would say, dragging her finger across the page. "But this part is brilliant. Don't touch it." Katie listened. She trusted Anna more than she trusted herself. Then one day, during one of her usual visits, Katie found Anna doing something unexpected. She was sitting at the table, bent low over a sheet of paper, writing by hand, so close it looked like she was almost touching the page with her nose. "What are you doing?" Katie asked. "Memoirs?" "Looks like you inspired me," Anna said without looking up. "So, yes. Slowly, but yes." Katie stepped behind her and looked over her shoulder. The handwriting was old-fashioned and beautiful, full of loops and careful curves. Anna was writing about the publishing world decades earlier, about censorship, about the books they weren't supposed to print, about the risks people took to get the truth into readers' hands, about how everything changed later and how hard it was to stay honest once the money started calling the shots. "This is going to be an incredible book," Katie said. "This is going to be a very old woman's book," Anna said with a crooked little smile. "But you'll help me publish it, won't you?" "Of course I will. I'll do everything I can. You know that." They hugged. That night Katie left late, happy in that deep, quiet way that doesn't happen often. She walked along the river looking at the bridges and the lights in the water, thinking about how strange life was. A year earlier she had been nobody, a proofreader collecting rejection letters. Now she was a writer the whole country knew, and all of it had come from one moment, one meeting, one small act of kindness. The next day she was walking through her neighborhood when she saw an older woman struggling with heavy grocery bags. The woman looked a little like Anna, small, slightly bent, tired eyes. Katie walked right up to her and said, "Let me help." She carried the bags to the woman's apartment building, then all the way to her door. The woman thanked her over and over, even invited her in for tea, but Katie was in a hurry. Before she left, she smiled and said, "A year ago, I helped an old woman with her bags, too. And it changed my life. So now I always help when I can. Because kindness comes back." The woman looked at her like she didn't fully understand, but she smiled anyway. Katie stepped back outside, took a breath of cool air, and smiled to herself. She knew this wasn't the kind of thing that would bring her another book deal or another award, but it gave her something else. That same lightness in her chest. That same warmth she'd felt the first time Anna told her, "Your novel is good." At home, a new day was waiting for her. A new chapter of the novel she'd been writing for 6 months. A signed copy of Crane on the shelf, set aside for Anna. And a text from her mom on her phone. "Come over. I baked your favorite pie." So Katie sat down at her laptop, opened a blank document, and started to write. Not about made-up people this time. About herself. About why kindness matters. About how one small choice can turn an entire life around. She called the piece The Bags of Happiness. And at the end she wrote, "If you're reading this, remember this. Don't just walk past. Stop. Help. Be there for someone. Kindness doesn't always come back fast. And it doesn't always come back looking the way you expected. But it comes back. It always does. I know, because it happened to me." The essay ran in a literary magazine. A month later, newspapers picked it up, then blogs, then social media pages. Letters started pouring in. I helped an older woman cross the street. I fed a stray cat. I gave up my seat on the train. People wrote to tell her that her story had pushed them to do something good for someone else. And Katie realized something then. The circle had closed. The kindness Anna had once shown her, she had passed on. Now it was living inside other people, in other choices, other moments, other hearts. One evening, sitting at her mother's kitchen table with Anna, Katie lifted her teacup and smiled. "To us," she said, "to the fact that we found each other, to every good thing we do, and to the way it comes back." "To shopping bags," Anna said with a grin. "To shopping bags," her mother laughed. They sat there with tea and pie, and all at once Katie felt it so clearly it almost scared her. She was happy, not the shiny kind of happy, not the kind that comes from attention or money or applause. Real happy, deep happy, the kind that settles into your bones. Not because she had success, because she was surrounded by people who loved her, because she was doing the thing she loved most, because her books were reaching people, because somewhere along the way she had become the woman she'd always wanted to be. "You know," she said, looking at both of them, "I think about that day all the time. I was walking home from work exhausted and angry, freezing cold, and then there was this little old lady carrying those bags. I could have kept going. I could have said, 'Sorry, I don't have time,' but I didn't. And that changed everything." "It changed all of us," Anna said softly. "You gave me my faith in people back. I'd started to think the world was full of selfish, cold-hearted strangers. And then there was you." "And me too," her mother said. "I watched you suffer through all those rejections. I heard you crying at night. I kept praying somebody would help you, and help came." "In the form of Anna," Katie said. "In the form of shopping bags," Anna shot back, and they all laughed. They stayed up past midnight talking about life, books, and what might still be ahead. Later, Katie took the train home. On the ride, she noticed a young woman across from her reading one of her novels, and Katie smiled to herself. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath. "Thank you for reading. Thank you for believing." When she got off at her stop, she pulled up the collar of her coat and stepped out into the snowy street. The wind hit her hard in the face, but she felt warm anyway, because inside her something was burning bright. A fire she had lit a year earlier with one simple act of kindness. A fire she now protected carefully. A fire she knew would never go out. 5 years passed. Katie Sullivan became one of the most celebrated writers in America. Her books were translated into 20 languages. Millions of copies sold. She won major awards. She was invited to the biggest literary festivals in the world, but she never really changed. She still lived in Chicago, still took the train, still stopped to help older women struggling with heavy grocery bags, and every year, on November 15th, the anniversary of her first book's release, she showed up at Anna's place with flowers in one hand and a bottle of champagne in the other. Anna had written a memoir too. Katie helped to get it published through that same little publishing house. The book was called My Life in Books, and it became a surprise bestseller among readers who loved literary history. Anna got her own taste of fame, and honestly, she was every bit as proud of it as Katie was of her awards. "We make a pretty good team," Anna would say. "The best," Katie would answer. Then one afternoon, walking down Michigan Avenue, Katie saw a young woman sitting alone on a bench, crying. In her hands was a thick manuscript tucked inside a plastic folder. Katie slowed down, walked over, and sat beside her. "What happened?" she asked. "No one will publish me," the girl said through tears. 7 publishers already said no. I don't even know what to do anymore. Katie smiled. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, and it said, Catherine Sullivan, author. Let me read it, she said. I'll help. I know a woman who can open doors. The girl looked up at her through tear-filled eyes like she couldn't believe what she was hearing, but Katie wasn't joking. She took the manuscript, promised she'd read it, and said she'd call. Then just before walking away, she turned back and added, and one more thing. If you ever see an older woman struggling with heavy bags, help her. It's good luck. She smiled and kept walking, leaving footprints on the wet sidewalk. Footprints leading toward kindness, toward happiness, toward something that never really ends. Because that's the truth of it, isn't it? Kindness doesn't ask for a reward. It just exists, but if you keep putting it into the world without counting the cost, without holding back, without demanding anything in return, it finds its way back to you. Maybe not right away, maybe not for a year, maybe in the exact form you didn't see coming, but the one you needed most. For one person, it's a book. For someone else, it's a friend. For someone else, it's a whole new life, and even more than that, you change the world around you. You make it softer, brighter, more human. Money fades, sales numbers disappear, applause goes quiet, but what you gave, that stays. What you planted grows. And one day, in somebody else's life, it blooms again. And maybe that person will look at someone in need and say, I'll help. Because once someone helped me,